Hello, my name is Ben Casey, and today we're going to be looking at the Autopsy of an Empire project, and we will be looking at the Persians today. So the reason I picked the Persians, I stumbled across them on my Greece versus Rome presentation project, and they were a fascinating aspect as I scratched the surface of the Persians. So I saw Persian option here. I said, why not take it and run with it? And here we are. So starting right away on the body analysis, we have some important places to start here. When understanding Persia, you have to understand their leaders, and they had three primary leaders that really helped out this empire. So you started with Cyrus the Great, and he was the founder of the Achaemenid Empire. There were different time periods when it was ruled, so the Achaemenid Empire was the first period of which it was ruled, and he is often regarded as Persia's greatest leader. He consolidated power to his organization of Iran in the Iranian plateau, which was the core of where the Persian Empire was located. He expanded west and created a mostly free and relaxed Persian Empire. People were free, people were happy, the government had legitimacy. And in the Bible, he is known as the conqueror of Babylon, and he freed the Jews in Babylon. So an overall, good guy. Wasn't cruel. Was not cruel at all. Helped his nation, freed others. Good guy. He dies in 529 BC, and then in 528 BC, his son Darius the Great takes over. He was the son of Cyrus the Great. And Darius had the largest impact on Persia's political and geographical structure. Why? Because when he took the Persian Empire and he divided it into 20 different provinces, and they were each ruled by someone called a satrap. And the satrap was like a local official, a local governor, whose role was to collect taxes and keep order within that district. So he created a little bit of federalism, if you will. So good for him if it worked. He was known for the expansion of the empire west of Cyrus. So he expanded western more towards India, northern India, and bits into Asia. Once Darius the Great died in 43, his son Xerxes the Great took over in 86. He takes over in 86. And while Xerxes was not very influential on Persia's timeline, he wasn't known for any huge conquerings or land stealing or whatever you want to call it. He did create stability and order. He helped Persia recover after their war with Greek that his father started. And he created order within his own empire. He created a stable and profitable Persia. It was centered on peace and structure. Again, people were happy. People were prosperous. Times were good. However, the moment it got bad for Xerxes is when he died. Because the moment King Xerxes died is when everything went down. This was the beginning of the end for Persia. And what happened is there was no one to take up Xerxes' throne. And so political instability rose up and it claimed Persia. There were rioters and there were anarchists who flooded the streets. They were rioting. They were unhappy that there was no ruler. People were trying to consolidate power. No one came to power. There was a big event called the March of 10,000. And that was where you had thousands of people march on Persia, its own citizens. And it just gave an inside look of how Persia was shifting. Because just a couple of years ago, with Xerxes and Darius and Cyrus, Persia was peaceful, Persia was prosperous, and its citizens were happy. And with the passing of Xerxes, it had all gone down the drain. Greece, ruled by Alexander the Great at the time, noticed how bad of a spot Persia was in, and they invaded Persia, eventually conquering them and destroying them. So that is the biggest information of Persia that you can come up with. When you look at their art and architectural, it was a very artistic culture. Art and architecture were both taken very serious. Temples and palaces were both constructed with a great degree of attention and detail, and they were mostly formed off of Mesopotamian art forms, with of course some small changes in design and its appearance, to make it their own. Persia's technological advancements in terms of intelligence and logistics, they did add a significant amount to astrology and philosophy. And along that was medicine. Persia was the most medically advanced during this time, due to the fact they used lots of natural herbs, and they discovered many cures for many sicknesses that many believed were uncurable. So props to the Persians on that one. Labor systems. Agriculture, and farming were obviously the greatest labor system for the Persians. They made strong irrigation systems. Crop culture was strong. They had many slaves working the yards and fields. So, a little backlash on Persia there. But other than that, they had strong trade. They traded raw materials, copper, lead, stone, gold, etc. And of course, their political structure. They had one main ruler in the form of a king or an emperor, and he held power over all citizens. However, don't forget that there was subdivisions, federalism, we would call it now. And that was when Darius the Great divided Persia into 20 subdivisions led by a local governor or official called a satrap. And while people didn't have a whole lot of freedom in their zones, they were considered by many historians as they, having some real autonomy. So they could come and do as they please. Sometimes they could go against the emperor's rulings as long as it wasn't too out of whack. Social structure for the Persians was obviously dominated by males and was headed up by leaders and kings. There was an obvious social hierarchy where it was kings, leaders, military, traders, merchants, farmers, and then of course at the very bottom you had slaves and sometimes prisoners of war. And so that was, socially the hierarchy. If you were a woman, you were regarded as, someone who works around at home, feeds and trains the men, or not trains the men, but feeds the men, take care of the men, etc., etc. Obviously, if you were a male who was a leader or a king, you were you were at the highest possible peak in Persia. Religious beliefs. They had an interesting religion, Zoroastrianism. I believe is that how you say it. It is an ancient Persian religion named after a Persian prophet, Zoroaster. So this prophet, people, he did lots of teachings and he taught, preached, and people believed that, this man was a god. And so after Zoroaster's passing, Zoroastrianism came along, and it is still one of the oldest monotheistic religions in the world, and is still followed today by many people in parts of Iran, India, and even some parts of Afghanistan. So, did not know that, did not know it was still followed. Monotheistic, very old. Persian literature. Persian literature was again formed mainly off of Mesopotamian literature, with small tweaks here and there. And today it has formed into Farsi, which is the primary and most dominant language in Iran. And Persian literature had a Cyrillic founding and was based off, like I said, Mesopotamian written works founded many years before. So shout out to the Mesopotamians for creating a literature that still exists to this day. Modified, but still exists. Trade routes. Persians relied on the royal road, which was sort of their primary trade route. And they often created lots of good waterways and canals. It proved to be essential for the Persians because they were able to trade safer. They avoided tax with their trade. And they created more allies to the west of them through the Indian Ocean. So that is the body report. If we take a look at the autopsy report here, Persian Empire, founded in 550 BCE, died in 331. The race was majority Persian. It was over 219 years old when it died. Single ruler in the form of an empire or emperor or king, and it was conquered by Alexander the Great in Greece. And why did it die? Political instability. That is super important when you talk about the death of Persia. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into why did Persia fall. Well, Persia was at its peak, and it was one of the most dominant empires to ever exist. It had lots of land, it expanded very far, their leaders were great, the people were happy, and it proved to be its own worst enemy in the end. So after the death of Xerxes the Great, Persia fell into the hands of political instability. And like I mentioned before, it was overrun by rioters and anarchists, whose only goal was to grab power. And without a central ruler, there was nobody to control the military, and there was nobody to reallocate money. This led to kings and rulers, grabbing up all the money, and eventually 80% of all the wealth in Persia was concentrated in the hands of kings and leaders. So clearly the people were not happy about that. Protested, rioted, and Persia was a mess. Sound familiar? Protesters, rioters. Interesting how these events can dictate what today looks like. Eventually, Greece noticed this. The great Alexander the Great, being the great man that he was, saw Persia in a desperate state and came and invaded them. Persia clearly did not stand a chance due to its, they were on their knees. And when you have a full and powerful Alexander the Great coming at you, there is not much that you can do. So they came to a halting defeat. If we look at the obituary here, they had a lot of good things going for them. Like I mentioned, they last a long time. They had a strong central government. People were happy. The government had legitimacy. People like the kings and the rulers. The kings and the family stayed in the family, sort of a monarch. And the culture and social structure all saw huge improvements in Persia. Again, if you were a slave or a woman, your role was insignificant. But for most people in Persia, they were oftentimes regarded with respect and ability to thrive in Persia. They had a strong economy focused on trade and agriculture. Their trade routes were good. They had strong naval passages. They had a strong military defense. They had a lot going for them. Excuse me a second. And while their technology wasn't prime in their era, they still did have a lot going for them. Like I said before, huge improvements in medicine, philosophy, and astrology. They made life improvements. It was beneficial. I read an article that said, some of the Persians' discovery of medicine is still used to this day. So they were not just some empire that rose up and then fell, and we've never heard from them again. No, they were strong, and they have their traditions and their creations have lasted decades and thousands of years. So kudos to the Persians. I wonder if there was another ruler after Xerxes the Great, how long Persia would have stood. It's interesting to think about that if there was no political instability, would they be the next great Roman Empire? We don't know. But it's interesting to think about. Credible sources listed here. Not much to talk about here. Some really good sources, good videos in here. Lots on the Persian Empire, which is good. You'd love to see it. And that is going to conclude this project. Super interesting. Glad I picked Persia. Glad I did this. Just a great way to learn about an empire. So, good stuff. Thank you for watching, and take care. Take care.